Hello guys, welcome to another video. Remember this Alfa 147? We have an issue with the power. It's not non-linear power. Well, the customer is now back again to solve that issue, but meanwhile the car was on another workshop because it's closer to the owner's residence to do the job here on the intake manifold. The intake manifold was removed, cleaned and put back together again. Okay, less work for me, yes, and I'm glad for that because fortunately I have a lot of work here in my home, but it's not great, okay, because the swirl is still there. If you want to know more about that, the swirl in the cleaning, I already have 2 videos for that. It is down on the description, so you can notice that you still have there that linkage that opens and closes the flaps, and for that we also have here this link to actuate those flaps. What I'm doing here now to make sure the problem is not there, because on the fluctuation on power, if you have an opening and closing flaps on the swirl over there, we can have this issue. And to test that before doing anything else, we will do what the factory said at the beginning of this problem. It is to remove this link over here, and with that hole over there, lock the flaps permanently open. Okay, let's do that to test if the problem is there, and if it's not, then let's test the vacuum lines for the turbo actuator on the road. I never done that on the channel. Now it's the time to reveal how it's done. So after a close inspection over here, I just the last time the car was here, I had a feeling it did not have any swirl flaps. I have to check on the earlier video, and after a close inspection, does not have even the actuator. So this intake manifold is not from this car. And on the attempt to move the swirl flaps to the open position, they are glued shut. Okay, even though it is badly done, it's not right like this, at least open the flaps, okay? The better is to remove them, but at least open does not account for the fluctuation of the power, okay? The problem is not that. If you have them closed, you just have low power at high RPM. At low RPM, you have a lot more power. That's why they are here, okay? The swirl flaps. But the problem is not on the swirl flaps. So let's test here the vacuum lines, okay? Then, if everything is good with the vacuum lines, we have here a problem with the remap, because I know for sure that this car has a remap. The owner told me he just did one, okay, and the problem persists. Let's start with a clean slate here with the remap, and before that, check here the vacuum lines. So the first part of this issue is the swirl flaps. I just want to explain you why they are there in the first place and what is the problem of having them permanently shut down. So you have here intake manifold, and you have 8 holes because you have a 16 valve engine. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, okay? And we have the air rushing down through the turbo and the hoses and whatnot and entering through the engine at high pressure, okay? But at low idle, that air does not have enough velocity to create a good swirl on the combustion, okay? So what the system does is to intervene here by closing half of those channels. In that way, the same quantity of air now has to pass through only 4 of the holes, and the velocity of that air has to double. In that way, creating an excellent swirl. But now at higher RPM, you need again to open again the holes to allow you for the more quantity of air to be able to gain more speed, more RPM, and more torque on the engine. If you have the permanently shut down, like it is right now in the car, if you have the permanently closed flaps like it is right now in the car, at high RPM, namely 3000 RPM up, you will have a very flat power line like it is happening now on the car. The similar issue can happen if you have everything working, but the intake is very clogged with the soot and EGR paste that normally builds up on these intake manifolds. So what you should do is to open permanently the swirl flaps like this, always taking the risk of not having so much torque down below on the lowest RPMs, okay? That is the function of the swirl flaps, is to have good down low power and also have very high power at high RPMs. Having the best of both worlds, like having a geometry turbo on the intake, okay? So you have good flow at low and good flow at high RPM, okay? Now, for the turbo itself, so the turbo, so in order to have a perfectly tuned turbo, you have now the control for the actuator that is made by an electronic valve, okay? And that electronic valve has a pipe that goes to the turbo, the vacuum line, and it has another vacuum line that comes from the vacuum pump. And then you have two wires to control that solenoid to create more or less geometry on the turbo. What I will test on the road is to put here a T and read how much vacuum I have right before the solenoid. I must have at all times before the solenoid negative 0.9 bar, always, because if I have that, no matter what I have prior to that, because I have here the vacuum pump, okay, and I may have more deviations for other stuff, okay, and finally reach here the vacuum pump. If I have any problems on another deviation, I will not have here the 0.9 bar of vacuum, and if I have it, I know everything from that part back, everything is okay. And after that, on this side over here, I remove this over here, on this side of the solenoid, I will test this line over here on the road, and I must have between 0.0 and minus 0.6. This is where things start to be a little bit more difficult to understand. Why? When I have necessity for high torque, I will input 0.6 bar of vacuum, negative, okay, to create the most geometry on a turbo possible, to create more boost possible. As I am reaching the 3000 RPM mark, I will start to lose this vacuum to 0. Okay, once I surpass 3000 RPM, the geometry is basically 0. While I am having those fluctuations on power, I must watch this number over here. If this number over here is completely flat, the problem is not with the command of the vacuum, because I may have here a remap that is constantly fluctuating my geometry over here. If this number over here is constantly fluctuating, it means that the car will fluctuate because of the engagement of the turbo. If I have this number completely flat, it means that I have a problem with the turbo, for example. If this number is completely flat, like it should be, it means that the problem may be with the turbo, or again with a remap on the injection side. I have the deviation over here. This one goes to the solenoid of the turbo. The left one comes from the vacuum pump and the vacuum reservoir, and this one on the right goes up over here and goes to the inside of the car, so I can have a reading of the vacuum. Pay attention that I'm not applying vacuum with the gun, okay? I'm just reading the vacuum, and I'm not reading the pressure of the turbo. As you can see over here, no matter what I do with the car, the pressure of the vacuum in this case must be always permanently on minus on vacuum 0.9, or about 1 atmosphere, okay? And the power also must remain the same, so the testing, as you are doing the testing, the symptoms must stay the same, fluctuation. If during one of the tests the symptom disappears and the car now runs great, it means that you find the problem on the last thing that you messed with. I also will test the sensor, the pressure sensor for the turbo, and I already did a video for that. It is down on the description so you to see how it's done. You will need a scan tool, you will need a pressure gun like this one, and this does pressure and vacuum, okay, but you will need a pressure one at least. And after this I will test the line on the geometry side, just to make sure that the vacuum reservoir and the vacuum pump and the lines and all of that is all great. And in fact it is. Remember that the solenoid will not need all of this vacuum, it will just use about half of that, okay, at all times. By the way, this solenoid, it appears to be new, so when I received the car on the previous video, it was already a new solenoid, or appears to be one. To remember also that I already did a testing on this geometry to see if it is loose on the previous video of this car. That video will be down in the description, but I will do it again because now I can hear that the turbo is doing a noise that was not present on the last video, which means that this turbo may have its last days soon. That also may mean that the geometry now may be starting to be sticky. But normally when the geometry is sticky, it again does not have this fluctuation of power, just have a flat level of power, okay, normally. I also am thinking here about these swirl flaps being closed. This as the intake was completely clogged on the past, this fluctuation may still be here because of the swirl flaps now being closed as a result of the lack of air being sucked into the engine. Maybe, okay? Let's do it step by step. So this part over here is a little bit awkward because the more you accelerate, the less vacuum you'll have, which means the less actuation on the turbo you will have. When you take out your foot, so I will accelerate, as you can see, 0. As I take out my foot off the accelerator, it tends to return to 0.6, negative. The fluctuation is very fast and hard to detect here, but let's see if I can show you. 0, so it fluctuates. It is fluctuating on the turbo, which means that the remap, or the map for that matter, is doing the command on the turbo to be like this. Another thing that I can see is on my scan tool, the voltage that is being sent to the solenoid. If the voltage is also fluctuating, it means that the command of the ECU is commanding the solenoid to fluctuate, okay? If the command is not fluctuating but the vacuum is, it means that the problem is with the solenoid. Again, this is a new solenoid and I don't think so, but I can also check for that, okay? Let's see if I can catch it again. Did you see? Okay, it fluctuated there on the turbo. Also, I have to see if the pressure is high as it was. We had too much boost on the other video, and I have to check that also. So the more you accelerate, the less actuation of vacuum you will have. But I can see now that I am having the command to the turbo to fluctuate also. I'm not telling you that the fluctuation is because of the geometry. No, I'm just telling you that the fluctuation also happens on the command of the turbo, which is again leading me to the problem with the remap again. Okay. And I also will have elements to talk to the remap guy. Another thing that is very relevant when you are seeing parameters on the diagnosis machine or your scan tool, if you have a remap like I have on this car, the parameters that are showing on the scan tool normally are not true. Most of the remap guys or girls or whatever will masquerade the figures to appear correct to the ECU. So the ECU is always controlling pressures of the turbo, pressure of fuel, and quantity of air are the main three things, okay? And it masquerades those figures so that it does not create a fault code, for example, so it does not deviate from what is supposed to happen with those pressures and quantity of air. So doing the scan tool firstly on the remap car can lead you to do a bad diagnosis. That is why I'm saving that for last, because I know it will be very misleading. So most of the times what I have to do, and technicians like me have to do, is to put the original map on the car, do the proper diagnosis of the problem, and then if the customer wants to do another remap, it does another remap, and then a few years later, all over again. It's just the way it is. Yeah. Oh yeah. Now, okay. Now you have an engine. Very nice. Very good. Now we have the engine all the way through to almost 5,000 RPM. This is the result of the new remap. I specifically told the remap guy I want the original map, okay, just with the EGR modification. And by his words, I will say you, and I quote, the car now has double the power that it had previously, and I have much more range than I had previously. Okay, so the problem is solved, completely solved. The problem is what was really the remap. The remap was made on top, like I was suspicious of. It was made on top of a problem, and that made the car very, very awkward to drive. Now the problem is completely solved. I just have to do again that intake manifold is not correct. That intake manifold is 50% closed because the flaps are closed. Why? Oh well. And for that I already have two videos down on the description. One of the videos is for the ones that you do not have to take out the support, the bracket for the high pressure fuel pump, and I have another video for the ones that you have to take out that bracket, that support of the high pressure fuel pump. In that case, of the ones that you have to do it, you have to do the timing job again, okay? And also for that I have a video, a very thorough video for how to do these MultiJet engines. The 16 valve ones are different from the 8 valves because you have to do an adjustment on the camshafts, okay? It is mandatory to do so, and for that, again, down on the description you have that. I also will replace the lower control arms and the upper ones too on this car, and for that I have videos down on the description. They are very old, I know, but I hope they are useful for you. If you have any doubts about that or any other thing, you can write me down on the comments below. Down on the description you have a lot of things that may be useful for you. Things regarding here lack of power, crank nor start, regarding for example brakes, suspension, timing belts, timing chains, really a lot of stuff like this one, for example troubleshooting, teardown of engines, really a lot of stuff that can be useful for you. Those videos are separated by playlists. I have various links for those playlists and also some other videos on links, okay? Also down on the description I have contact informations and I have links for helps for the channel if you are able to do so. If you are able to do a monthly contribution or a sporadic contribution, I'm really glad for that, okay? I see you next time, guys. Bye!